On March 27, 1999, the United States Air Force was flying a combat mission over Serbia using an aircraft that was supposed to be invisible. This is the F-117 Nighthawk. It was developed in absolute secrecy at Lockheed's Skunk Works facility, costing over $2 billion to design. And before this night, it had flown 1,271 combat missions without a single loss. But its perfect streak ended when a Serbian air defense commander named Zoltan Dani shot it out of the sky. He didn't use an advanced weapon system to do it. He used a radar setup so old it still ran on glass vacuum tubes. Dani was commanding a Soviet-era P-18 radar. It was originally built in the 1970s. By 1999, NATO military planners considered the system entirely obsolete. In fact, they evaluated the P-18 as such a non-threat that they deliberately chose not to deploy electronic jamming countermeasures against it. That decision cost $2 billion. The destruction of the Nighthawk was a systemic failure of military planning. When engineers optimize a system exclusively to defeat the most modern, advanced threats, they create a blind spot for the older, obsolete technology they stopped worrying about. This animation shows exactly why the F-117 looked the way it did and how it was supposed to work. The aircraft's body was a collection of flat, angled panels. Those facets were specifically engineered to defeat high-frequency X and S-band radar, the bands used by modern missile guidance systems. When the short wavelengths from those modern radars hit the angled surfaces, they scattered into empty space instead of bouncing back to the receiver. Because none of those waves returned to the dish, the radar screen remained clear. That geometry reduced the radar cross-section of a massive 52,000-pound bomber down to the size of a golf ball. To standard high-frequency defense networks, the aircraft simply wasn't there. The problem was the specific frequency of the P-18 radar in Zoltan Dani's battery. The P-18 operated on the VHF, or very high-frequency band. Unlike modern fire control radars, VHF systems use incredibly long, wide electromagnetic wavelengths. Look at how the physics change in this new animation. When you hit those same geometric flat panels with long VHF wavelengths, the stealth coating and the angles become less effective. The wide waves fail to scatter cleanly. Instead, a portion of the wave hits the airframe and bounces directly back to the originating radar dish, producing a weak, fuzzy return signal. The F-117 was perfectly camouflaged, but only against a highly specific type of light. Against an older, cheaper spectrum, it was completely exposed. A fuzzy radar return alone isn't enough to shoot down a jet. Dani laid a trap. For weeks, he manually tracked the flight paths of NATO aircraft over Serbia. He noticed they were using highly predictable corridors every single night to avoid known anti-air positions. Dani positioned his battery along one of those corridors, but he kept his systems completely quiet. NATO electronic warfare planes were constantly scanning the sky for enemy radar emissions. If Dani ran his dish continuously, they would pinpoint his location and destroy his battery in minutes. So he instituted strict emission discipline, turning his radar on for only brief, few-second bursts before powering it back down. At approximately 8:15 p.m., during one of those brief radar bursts, Dani saw something on his analog screen. It was barely visible above the background static, but the return was moving at the exact speed and altitude of a strike aircraft. He had to make a choice: abort or trust the fuzzy data from an obsolete machine. Dani trusted his radar. Relying entirely on his manual calculations, he fired 2 S-125 Neva missiles, technology originally designed in the 1950s, aiming them into a calculated box of empty space where he predicted the aircraft would be in 12 seconds. The first missile missed. The second detonated near the left wing of the F-117. The pilot, Lieutenant Colonel Dale Zelko, lost control of the aircraft and ejected at 8,000 feet. He survived and was recovered safely hours later by U.S. search and rescue teams. The ambush worked because Dani recognized the predictability of the opposing forces, and he weaponized it. He defeated the world's most sophisticated aerospace engineering through patience and observation rather than superior technology. With the aircraft destroyed, a much larger geopolitical problem began. The shattered remains of the Nighthawk were lying in a Serbian field. Before the United States military could dispatch bombers to destroy the crash site, Serbian forces managed to recover highly classified sections of the airframe and its radar-absorbing coating. Those physical samples did not stay in Serbia. Multiple reports and official statements indicate that substantial pieces of the wreckage were quickly transferred to intelligence agencies in Russia and China, giving their aerospace engineers the exact physical materials they needed to dissect and reverse engineer the American stealth program. Following the 1999 crash, aviation analysts noted a rapid acceleration in those nations' previously stalled stealth initiatives. Roughly a decade later, China debuted its first operational stealth fighter, the J-20. Russia's stealth program experienced a nearly identical leap forward, culminating in the maiden flight of their Su-57 fighter jet just 1 year prior to the Chinese launch. In 2008, the United States quietly retired the entire multi-billion-dollar F-117 fleet. As for Zoltan Dani, the man who brought down the invisible aircraft, he eventually retired from the military and opened a civilian bakery. A perfect machine was brought down because of a basic rule of engineering and warfare. Any system strictly optimized for the future will eventually expose a blind spot to the past. Colonel Dani evaluated the tools he had, spotted the flaw in the enemy's design, and proved that a commander with better thinking will always beat an opponent relying solely on better technology. Next time, we're looking at a piece of U.S. military hardware that costs $580,000 to build, and exploring exactly why it can be effortlessly destroyed by a weapon that costs just $11.